Hey everybody, Dustin Topirak here, columnist Andy Graham, going with one more pregame preview for the year. Indiana with Purdue tomorrow for the old Oaken Bucket. Indiana desperately wants to take that back after losing it last year and after last week losing the game that made them officially ineligible for bowl competition. Just to get right at it, Andy, what do you see as being important in this one? What's Indiana got to do to really end Purdue's bowl chances and end their season with a win?
Play well on offense. I mean, Indiana's defense obviously has been problematic much of the time this season, but I really think Indiana's offense is the key to this game in terms of Indiana's chances of winning it. Purdue struggled against spread offenses at times this year. Remember how even Marshall ripped them up pretty badly,
right.
And so I think that if Cam Kaufman plays well and Indiana executes well on offense, I think that's the most dominant unit in this game. I think all the rest of the units on either side, I think Purdue's defense is slightly better. I think there's lots of other areas where you can kind of evaluate the teams, but I think Indiana's offense can be very powerful at times, and that's the single most dominant unit on the field, in my opinion, if the quarterbacking play is good, if the execution is good. And the other wild card is Robert Marve, the Purdue quarterback, whose story is really inspirational. I don't care who you're rooting for, but you got to root for that kid. Given everything he's been through, he's in his sixth season. Kevin Wilson joked about him being around since the 1980s.
I got a laugh out of that. Even from the distance I was watching it, even in Brooklyn, I was laughing in my hotel room at that one.
And but clearly Wilson respects him, and I think he's also grateful that Marv was feeding him the scores when they were flying back on the plane in the spring, and Marv was keeping him apprised of how the IU basketball team was doing against VCU in the NCAA tournament. But he's known Marv for a long time. He recruited him when Marv was in high school, and Marv was the number 8 ranked quarterback coming out of high school that year. Went to Miami.
Ended up in Miami when Miami was still churning out quarterbacks, and that was kind of the end of that.
Kind of had a falling out with Randy Shannon, the coach, I think, at that time, and then went to Purdue and has had just devastating injury after devastating injury. Essentially, he has no ACL in his knee. He's playing without an ACL. And really having less problems with his knee, reportedly, than he was.
Because he has no ACL.
He's got no ACL.
There's nothing to swell. There's nothing to swell. There's nothing to.
And he's playing really well. I mean, something like 52 of 79 or something like that over the last couple of 3 games.
I've got him at 43 of 59 over the last
43 of 59, sorry.
Yeah.
So, but, obviously that's exceptionally accurate. And I think the Purdue will play inspired football behind him tomorrow. And I think if Indiana's going to win, it's going to have to score a lot of points.
Yeah, no, I'll touch on each of those topics. I think you're right when you said that. I think Indiana's passing offense. I mean, if you look sort of at the sort of conference-wide ranks at everything, I mean, more or less the only thing that's really not mediocre in this. I wouldn't say in this game, but out of kind of the primary, I guess, sort of units. I don't know. This doesn't make sense, but maybe it will when I hash this out. Indiana's passing offense is the best in the Big Ten. Purdue's everything is between like 7th and 10th. Like passing offense is somewhere middling, rushing offense is middling. Both in both defensive categories they're middling or worse. Indiana obviously has statistically the worst defense in the Big Ten. Rushing offense is fading really, really fast. They're down to 11th. But the one, if there's one thing that anybody in this game is good at, it's Indiana throwing the ball. And they're averaging over 300 yards a game, and I'm not sure. I mean, Purdue's got some really good defensive backs. Josh Johnson, Hardwell, and really well regarded. Obviously, Kawan Short is probably the best player in the the player with the most NFL potential in this game. He's got 6 sacks, 14 tackles for loss. He's among the leaders in that category. So obviously, Purdue has some things they can do on defense, and it'll be very, very hard for Indiana to run on them. But Indiana's been successful passing on just about everybody, just at least in terms of yardage. I think there's a good chance that they could, that's the best thing they could use to their advantage. Purdue, like you said, I mean, Marv's played well, but I mean that's not an extremely potent offense. Obviously, Indiana hasn't had a great defense. Indiana hasn't really stopped anybody. But I mean, maybe Illinois. Basically they were able to really stop Illinois for the most part, and Iowa to a certain degree. But it doesn't seem like this is an overly potent team that Indiana can't handle. I mean, if Indiana can turn this into a shootout, they've got a good chance. If they can score points and score a bunch of them, and I think they should be able to get through this one without being totally wiped off the map.
And Purdue does have a lot of speed. Octavian Edison's a guy I've always liked as a wideout. They have a good return game. So, Indiana's going to have to be sharp on special teams, too. And I thought Purdue had, early in the season when I was watching them play, I mean, they showed a lot of speed.
Yeah.
They really played Notre Dame real well up at South Bend, up at Notre Dame. Had Ohio State beaten Columbus. They had some moments early where they were very impressive.
Right.
But they started losing home
They also
games.
had some meetings where they got trucked.
Yeah, they did. They got trucked by Michigan and Wisconsin in back-to-back weeks at home.
And then got handled by Minnesota.
And really just didn't seem to handle that very well. I mean, I think they were really pointing for this year, and they had those back-to-back home games against really good teams where, you pretty much got to split at home at least if you're going to be in the a lot of people had them in the conversation, myself included, I admit.
Well, somebody had to be in the conversation.
As being in the leaders, as being the possible leaders representative in Indianapolis, if Wisconsin wasn't going to do it, because Wisconsin looked shaky.
Well, it had to be somebody because it was Purdue, Illinois, and Indiana.
Right.
And so one of those three teams had to step up.
But Purdue had impressed me. I mean, I watched all of that Notre Dame game. They played well, and Notre Dame obviously is continue to have a mighty fine season. So I mean, I think Purdue has some capacity, but there's so many wild cards here. I mean, Purdue's playing for bowl eligibility. They're playing probably for Danny Hope's job, or at least reportedly. Could be
I don't know.
Danny
I mean,
Hope's job. I don't know
maybe.
if that's true or not.
We'll see about
but
that.
there's a lot of noise around this game involving Purdue, and I think Purdue's going to be sky high even by bucket standards. I mean, I think they're going to be really up. Now, are they going to be tight? Are they going to be overhyped? Who knows? I think this game's got a lot of really interesting wild card elements to it that I'm not sure how are going to pan out.
No, and I think it still is important for Indiana. I think Kevin Wilson made a point of saying, number one, he's not trying to push the revenge, hurt your rival angle. It's a rivalry game, and it's great to have a rivalry game, but in the same sense, it's not like, well, we can keep them from having a bowl game, and spoiling them is really something. But, I think 5-7 is an important mark there for a few reasons. And I think one of them is they were 5-7 in Lynch's last year. This sort of, to get back to 5-7,
with a win to Purdue.
Which I don't think is something maybe they think about, but I look at it as, hey, like they've evened that out.
Right.
You know what I mean?
They've
gotten through the transition.
That ended with a big win at Purdue.
It did. And it's not trying to set the standard as, the Bill Lynch years is the standard. It's basically saying we went through the transition and we got through it, came out on the other side, and we're where we were before that, and now we can build further. Yeah. We've reached where we were when we not when they started falling necessarily. That's not really the way to put it, but a transition kind of almost always requires a step back. Yeah, and they took the step back, and to be able to get back to equal level with where they stood would mean a lot. Now, part of the reason that they took a step back was not necessarily transition; it was simply because it was going to be a down cycle year regardless.
Well, that's right, and because I agree with you, but I would also say that. Because the bottom line is the bottom line. How many wins and losses do you have?
Absolutely.
However, having said that, that was a senior-driven team.
It was.
Ben Chappell and all
it was. If they would have kept Bill Lynch.
And I actually think Indiana is better shape now.
Sure.
Even win or lose Saturday.
Than they were at that point.
No,
that team right there, I mean, obviously, for all of the transition pains and the defections and all that sort of thing, really the biggest reason that team went from being 5-7 to 1-11 is it lost guys like Ben Chappell and Tannen Doss, and a whole list of other guys, but probably most importantly those two. I mean, Ben Chappell is statistically one of the 2 or 3 best passers in the history of Indiana football. Tannen Doss is probably Tannen Doss is an NFL player and a 4th-round draft pick. James Brewer is an NFL player. I mean, a lot of really important guys were gone, and whoever was going to be coach, I mean, they were probably maybe lost a game or two they would not have ordinarily lost just because they were in the middle of all that tumult and it was messy, and they were playing a bunch of freshmen that they might not have played if they'd have stayed the course. But it probably was better for them in the long run. But one way or the other, that was going to be a bad team regardless of who was coaching it, just because they lost so much and they really had to start over, especially at the quarterback position. Right. But this, at the very least, does sort of symbolically say, okay, we're back to level ground, and this is where we build up from. We've gotten back this far up the hill to where we stood. Now it's the next step to take.
No matter who you are, if you win your rival game at the end of the year, it just makes the offseason better.
It makes a huge difference. And I think Wilson made a good point this week when he said, it's about momentum, and this is not a nostalgic team. This is a very young team, and therefore it does not look at this game as an end point. It looks at it as it's just sort of the next step. We carried this on. through the offseason and go from there. We don't feel like we failed. We feel like we took these steps and we continue to take more. And that makes a lot of sense for where they stand. I mean, they did make a lot of progress. Going from 1-11 to respectable 4-8 or 5-7 is a big step from year 1 to year 2. And they just appear to be a much more together team. And, they were only, really 3 points away from having 6 wins heading into this.
Yeah.
If they beat Navy and, and Ball State, there's a postseason for them regardless. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know you go for that. I don't know. I mean, I think it's a couple plays, and you don't, I mean, Cam Kaufman and Nate Sudfeld did some things, and you can't necessarily say that Trey definitively would have had as good of a passing game, especially against Ball State. Those guys threw the ball really well that game. Sure. Regardless, we're coming to the end, so he's got to get going.
I do.
Anyway, it's a late night. But anyway, one more Old Oak and Bucket tomorrow. Join us, live chat, all that kind of stuff. Thanks as always.